apologies, hold on. Okay. Good morning. My name is Hendrik van Genderen. I'm the Water Resources Engineer at the Water Authority Cayman. I will turn over this session shortly to Mr. Ignatius Jean, who will moderate this panel discussion. Welcome to our panel discussion about disaster preparedness and recovery in the Caribbean. We are fortunate to have a dynamic panel of persons with a diverse background who have worked extensively on disaster preparation and recovery in the Caribbean, and we expect a lively discussion. I would like to give a big thank you to the sponsors of our conference, and we really appreciate the support of Sandpick Contracting Cayman Limited, Deal Metering, Maya, Water Engineering and Pipeline Company Limited, WEPCO, Consolidated Water Company Limited, Dart Enterprises Limited, Florida Aqua Store, and Argo American. A couple of housekeeping rules here. You will have the opportunity to submit written questions at any time throughout the discussion. Just type them in the Q&A in the chat box in either Zoom or Hoover. And Mr. Ignatius Jean, who will moderate this panel discussion, will use your questions throughout the discussion. Except for the microphones of the moderators and panelists, all other microphones will be muted. And we also will turn off everybody's camera. So we will only see the people who are speaking, actually. It's my pleasure now to turn over this session to Mr. Ignatius Jean, the Executive Director of the Caribbean Water and Sewerage Association, who will moderate this discussion. Ignatius,
good morning.
It's all yours.
Thank you very much, Hendrik, and good morning, everyone. And special good morning to all the team at the Cayman Islands Water Authority for doing an excellent job in hosting the conference thus far. And to the CWWA, I want to again congratulate them on their 30th anniversary of hosting this conference. And would like to thank our panelists who have agreed to participate in this discussion. I think we have an excellent team who will be able to give some good insights into the subject that we are taking on today, that is looking at disaster preparedness and recovery. Of course, I, as was introduced, as the Executive Director at the Caribbean Water and Sewage Association. We are an association of water utilities in the region. And I have been around with CAWASA since 2014, quite a long time now. And I've been a member of the executive of the CWWA since 2019, when St. Lucia was supposed to have hosted the conference. And I was then appointed chairman of the local organizing committee by the government of St. Lucia, but that had to be aborted owing to the COVID pandemic. And so I also represent what we call the CARIWAP, that is an amalgam of CWWA and CAWASA on the International Steering Committee of the UN Habitat's Global Water Operators Partnerships Alliance. Quite a mouthful, but what we do is to organize water operator partnerships. And together with the director of the CWWA, we also partner on the CDEMA WASH group. And I think here comes the work that I've done with one of our distinguished panelists. And of course, I wear a couple of other hats around the region as the chairman of the board of the Caribbean Agricultural Research and Development Institute, and just recently the chairman of the Development Control Authority in St. Lucia. That is the sort of town and country planning authority in St. Lucia. But that's a whole lot of part of the national and regional service. So I have with us this morning a distinguished panel comprising Ms. Daniel Coleman, who is the Director for Hazard Management of the Cayman Islands, Mr. Cyprian Gibson, he's the Assistant General Manager for the Family Islands Division of the Water and Sewage Corporation of the Bahamas. Mr. Richard Yu, who is the President and CEO of an Executive Caribbean Utilities Company Limited and Readiness Committee Chair, R3 Cayman Foundation in the Cayman Islands, and Ms. Sunny Guidotti, the Regional WASH Specialist of the WASH-LAC of UNICEF in Latin America and the Caribbean region. And I have lots of the long bios, but I think for the time being, we will just let you know that Ms. Coleman has experience working with humanitarian sector in the Cayman Islands and overseas, and specifically in areas relating to disaster response and risk reduction and human rights. And she's an attorney and left the legal world to assist in the Drive to Recovery program in post-tsunami Thailand. She has since worked with the Human Rights Committee of the Cayman Hospice Care, the British Red Cross, Cayman Islands Red Cross, and is a member of the IFRC's Global Emergency Response Unit of the Americas and Regional Intervention Team. I also have Mr. Cyprian Gibson, who is, well, he has been making quite a splash for himself in the water world, and he's a civil and environmental engineer, and he has been around with the CWWA as a past president himself of the CWWA, and he has been part of all of what is going on now, of hosting as many conferences in the Bahamas. And as the Assistant General Manager with responsibility for the Family Islands for the Bahamas, Water and Sewage Corporation, he's tasked with supervision of the WSC's operations and capital projects on the Family Islands, which involves some 50 water supply and distribution systems and commercial centers on 25 islands and keys. Mr. Gibson, of course, he has had all the experiences working with the challenges of several hurricanes. And we have Mr. Richard Yu, another distinguished panelist who is a registered professional engineer. Mr. Yu is perhaps best known as President and Chief Executive Officer of the Caribbean Utilities Company, a role he has fulfilled since 2005. In addition to his current role as Chairman of the R3 Readiness Committee, Richard has served on several international and local boards, including the University of College and the Cayman Islands. And as I was saying before we came on live, that it is not often that we get water and electricity mixing. And so today we know that making running water run, we can't do this without the energy sector. So we have with us Mr. Richard Yu, who will elaborate more on some of the challenges during disasters with energy and water. And finally, we have Ms. Sunny Guidotti, my good friend. We have worked on the volcanic eruption in St. Vincent and the Grenadines earlier this year, and collaborated on the floods in Guyana. She has a public health and environment. She's a public health and environmental engineer, and with 14 years experience in emergency response development, private sector and research. She has worked at global, regional, country and field levels in various regions and countries, including the USA, Panama, Myanmar, Angola, Kenya, Liberia, Haiti, Honduras, South Africa, Bolivia, Guatemala, South Sudan, and Uganda. Ms. Guidotti is fluent in Portuguese, English, Spanish, French, and Haitian Creole. Bienvenue. And she has demonstrated experience and leadership in coordination program and team management, knowledge management, gender equality, and social inclusion in WASH. I will not go into all of this exciting and well-decorated CV of Sunny, but moi ka souhaiter une bonne journée, bienvenue, qui t'ai parlé un mot Creole, because this is Creole Heritage Month as well. So welcome panelists, And what we will do now, I will just give an quick overview, because I know we're pressed for time, but disasters do affect our Caribbean region, and we are living in one of the most vulnerable regions in the world. This year, we have seen a number of active hurricanes, a very active hurricane season. And of course, we have not had a direct hits with as much devastating impacts, but we have been affected, particularly during the passage of Elsa and Grace. We had earlier this year the volcanic eruption of La Soufrière in St. Vincent in April. And of course, we had flooding in Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago, the earthquake in Haiti, which again got another whammy when I think it was Elsa and Grace followed suit. And of course, on the islands off the coast of Honduras, the islands of Guanara, which is one of the Bay Islands of the coast of Honduras, was destroyed, had fire which destroyed many homes and businesses in the Bonaca Key. On top of that, the entire region also continues to deal with the impact of the global COVID-19 pandemic, which has caused tremendous problems for all of us around the region and affected the way we live. The good news, if there is such a thing in this context, is that the Caribbean people, we are resilient. I've said so before. This is probably because we have grown up with disasters, and it is apparent that we have learned to live with disasters because we are still here in the Caribbean. And as we say in the Caribbean vernacular, we are leaving, we now move. The audience of this conference, the water, wastewater, and solid waste professionals in our region are also actively involved in disaster preparedness and recovery. Each of these utilities have a disaster preparedness and recovery plan, as this is part of running their businesses. It is part of getting businesses back up and running better immediately following a disaster. As the issue of disaster preparedness and recovery is so close to all of us, the Water Authority of the Cayman, which hosts the conference this year, decided that it was a good idea to have this panel discussion with panelists who all in our own right have been dealing with this issue. And we come from different backgrounds and perspectives, but the commonality is that in our professional or voluntary lives, we all play key roles in leading, in preparing and recovering from disasters. And this discussion provides an opportunity for us to share and discuss our experiences with our colleagues around the region, and how the audiences, our audience, can benefit from the expertise and insights of our panel. So I'd like to invite our panelists now I will invite Ms. Danielle Coleman to just give her introductory remarks and then just a quick overview of her presentation. Over to you, Danielle.
Good morning, Ignatius, and good morning to everyone listening, as well as the whole panel. I really want to thank the Water Authority for inviting us to be part of this. I do think the utility sector is such a critical partner in disaster response. As you mentioned, Ignatius, my background was in law, and then we had Hurricane Ivan in 2004. Now, of course, that really shifted my whole perspective as to where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do with my life. And I guess I've been in this kind of line of work ever since, both, as you say, in Thailand tsunami recovery, as well as responding in the region and working with the British Red Cross and the Federation over the last few years. So it's been, I guess, about 18 years of that. But I do think, again, as hazard management, as director now in my current role as director of the National Disaster Management Office, we are the coordinators of the National Emergency Operations Centre. Now, again, utilities play a critical part in that. And again, Miss Julia, I know, is on listening, as well as Mr. Hugh as a panelist. You know, they have a substantial role to play in that. We can't get back to normal in the response and recovery of our islands if we're not ready and we're not prepared and we haven't got our utilities up and running. So I think that's a really, really critical part, making sure utilities are up and running. and their continuity of operations is always ready to go, both before and after. I think that's very quickly just an oversight from me. I'm very happy to pass on. We'll carry on the questions after that.
Okay, thank you so much, Dani. Mr. Richard Yu, please.
Good morning, conference attendees and fellow panelists. I'm Richard Yu. As mentioned, I'm the president and CEO of Caribbean Utilities Company Limited. We're the electricity provider on the island of Grand Cayman. I'm also the chair of the Readiness Subcommittee of R3 Cayman Foundation. This is a not-for-profit born in the middle of the pandemic with a founding contribution of $1 million Cayman Islands dollars from the Kenneth B. Dart Foundation, and a commitment to match a further $4 million donations. R3 is independently managed by an unpaid board of directors drawn from a range of business sectors and non-governmental community leaders, and aims to assist the Cayman Islands in being better prepared for natural or man-made emergencies or disasters, and provide immediate relief after an event and assist in the recovery from the event. R3 mainly funds other NPOs and government agencies that work in these three spaces of readiness, relief, and recovery, allowing them to spend less time fundraising and more time carrying out the impactful programs and services the Cayman community needs in these areas. In my 33 years in my role at CUC, I've dealt with the preparation and recovery from Hurricanes Gilbert, major Hurricanes Gilbert and Ivan, and earlier this year, Tropical Storm Grace. We've also had a few earthquakes, but thankfully no major ones, and now a full-blown pandemic. So I've had my fair share of disasters, and obviously as a critical services provider, we're one of the key companies that has to be up and running for the island to recover following a major disaster.
Okay, and then we have Mr. Cyprian Gibson of the Bahamas. Good morning, Cyprian. I think you seem to be muted. I think your audio is off. Okay, I don't know, we're having a technical difficulty with Cyprian's audio. So maybe while he gets that sorted out, we will move to Sunny in the interim.
Sure. Yes, thank you, Ignatius. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you. Go ahead.
Great. Yeah, no, thank you for the invitation. It's really an honor to be here with you all. As Ignatius mentioned, I've worked in different regions, but the Latin American Caribbean region is close to heart. I'm from Brazil, and I have a special appreciation for the Caribbean. So it's really a pleasure to be here with you. As you mentioned, I am working as a regional WASH specialist for UNICEF, and in that role, I support 24 of our country. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, we are hearing you.
Yeah. So in that role, I support 24 of our country offices that cover multiple countries and territories along that, and the work that we do in UNICEF, it's on one hand to ensure preparedness and response to emergencies in the WASH, water, sanitation, and hygiene area, so program and service delivery, but also we are mandated globally to lead and support sector and cluster coordination. And so, following the General Assembly resolution in 1991 and the major humanitarian reform in 2005, UNICEF was nominated as the UN agency globally to lead the WASH sector. And as a result of that, we lead the global WASH cluster, but also in LAC, we co-lead the WASH-LAC group, the regional sector group. And our role in that is to support national WASH sector platforms. No? To add a bit, my experience in the Caribbean has been in supporting both disaster preparedness and response for the WASH sector and program, as you said, including in San Vicente the Grenadines recently, and in Haiti 10 years ago, but also through our team in the Dominica, the Guyana flooding, the Bahamas hurricanes. So this is, I think, from my side. I don't want to extend myself, and we can share a bit more about preparation and recovery from disasters for the WASH sector. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's see if we get Cyprian back on with us. Are you on, Cyprian? He may have disconnected to come back on. I'm not seeing him. Okay, well, let's continue, and if and when he gets back in, we'll get into. Oh, that sounds like. Are you back on, Cyprian?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
loud and clear and crisp.
Now, I don't know if you have the video.
No, I don't have the video, but you can go ahead. We can hear you.
Okay, no problem. It's a pleasure to be here in this distinguished panel, and thank you very much to contribute from my perspective. Of course, you've mentioned it already. We are hazard prone, earthquakes, landslides, flooding, everything, hurricanes, volcanoes. Of course, now is climate change. And on top of that, the pandemic. In the Caribbean, of course, since 2000, there's been more than 224 billion in damage. And on top of that, climate change, as mentioned, is really real. And as Professor Michael Taylor said from the climate change studies, no doubt climate change, the climate is already changing. There's no return, there's no excuse, there's no choice and no regrets. So from this region, we are indeed hazard prone, disaster prone, but of course, it makes for opportunities in that we recognize, the need is recognized. It's also a part of our sustainable development goals. There's increased recognition for success from the Caribbean. And even Zoom is now leveling the playing field where everybody has an opportunity to interact globally. And of course, there's more interest from the private and public sector for partnerships. And given the success in the region, since we're discussing it from a regional perspective, there's a lot of opportunity now to mobilize funds. And of course, a big part of it is bringing simplicity to funding from the multinational agencies.
We lost you a bit, Cyprian.
You can hear me?
Yeah, you were fading.
Okay. And so from a regional perspective, I think it's going to be important to build on the institutions in the region. And we've all had a lot of experience over the many years in disasters and operations and interacting in conferences. And so many models, CDB, CDMA, CCCs, UWI, even in other sectors like the Caribbean Tourism Organization. So I think to spur on the debate is to continue to encourage Caribbean regional cooperation and build on the success that we have had. Strengthening our institutions, scaling them up, building capacities and professionals, Partnerships continued across all sectors, and of course, continue to push for regulation and policy in the region. From the Bahamas perspective, of course, the water sector, our experience in hurricanes, keep it simple. We know water is critical to life. We are affected by sea surges, vulnerabilities of other structures. We're talking about utilities and the like. For us, power, backup power is a big thing for the water sector. And we have to protect our well fields. Communications are key. We constantly seek to improve on our plans, educate and train constantly, and build on the best practices that we have. In the Bahamas, we try as best we can to just keep it simple. And so I think that's enough for me to start the debate and move from there while we address the technical difficulties. But thank you all for the patience.
Thank you, Cyprian. I think you have given us a good overview of some of what we need to be dealing with this morning. I will head back straight to Suni. Well, I should say one of the things that happened after the volcanic eruption in St. Vincent and the Grenadines in April was that I think it was for the first time that CBIMA brought on board the CWWA and CAWASA to be part of the WASH team, that is the Water, Sanitation and Health team. And that worked wonders for us because we had a good teammate, Suni, who kept us working 24/7 and with updates and all the networking and putting systems in place so that we could have assisted with the recovery effort in St. Vincent. But Suni, of course, you know that we have all been preoccupied with attending and the recovery on hurricanes. But it was not often. I think the last big eruption we had was in 1979 in the same St. Vincent. And some of the experiences that we had during that period. And of course, now we have the UAE, the UE Seismic, the University of the West Indies Seismic have been able to do the sort of forecast or give the early warning. And I think there was a lot of that in St. Vincent to be able to evacuate before the big eruption. What are some of the lessons learned from that experience in dealing with the humanitarian effort soon?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I mean, volcano eruptions and I think earthquakes are the type of disasters that usually give us a very short amount of time to prepare and mitigate. So, you know, preparedness is a key for this type of disasters. And when I say preparedness, I don't talk only about agencies or companies specific and internal preparedness, but I talk about the WASH sector preparedness as a whole. So, for example, ensuring that there is a coordinated WASH sector in regular times with all the key actors in the country can really help to make sure that you have a fluid and effective coordination and emergency response when a disaster happens. Everybody knows each other, you already have tools in place, and I think that kind of sector coordination in regular times, it has been sort of a key lesson that when an emergency comes, it can just really activate. People know each other, they already know the tools, and you just get on with the work and the response. You know? That's I think one key lesson, I think both from the St. Vincent Grenadines, but also from other emergencies. I think another one is how information management is crucial for the WASH response and for other sectors response as well. You know, mapping the most at-risk areas through sound rapid WASH assessments, making sure that we have different levels of assessment that consider the community's needs, but also the segments within the community's needs. For example, women or children might feel the disaster in a different way than men and elderly and others in the community. So really having the ability to assess the different needs across the population and the subgroups within the population is key. And utilizing technology to get real-time data is key. And I think in the San Vicente and the Grenadines rapid assessment, we were able to see that. We were able to see in real time what the assessors were collecting. And we're able with that information to make decisions and make sure that the response was targeting the most at need and most at risk areas. No, I mean, with the regional WASH-LAC group, we have done we've done a few, sort of developed a few tools that has helped us to roll out emergency coordination quickly when there isn't something in place. For example, with the hurricane at Ignatius last year, we developed a prioritization matrix, and with local mayors, we've mapped the full country, every community, in terms of their WASH indicator needs, but also the impact they had felt, and also other vulnerability indicators, considering their health, their COVID cases, their nutrition cases, the situation of their institutions like schools and hospitals and healthcare facilities. And so with that, the prioritization matrix allowed the WASH sector to ensure that we not only focus on the hardest hit, the most vulnerable communities, but that we monitor the response along the way to make sure that we continue to deliver along that prioritization list of sites. We've also established minimum requirements for WASH sectors to give a clear milestone or guidance so that national WASH sectors are able to identify, okay, what are the key things we could do to be better prepared and to better respond? We have those things available online. And yeah, just another final point is that, as some of the colleagues mentioned, climate change is here and is there, and I think we need to always integrate in our sector the climate change and adaptation to make sure that our response and our recovery actions integrate climate risk and risk-informed solutions and programs. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Suni. That was quite comprehensive. But as we're at it, in speaking of vulnerabilities and how do we protect the vulnerable, I think I will shift over to Dani, who has had considerable international experience with respect to managing the vulnerable segments of society. From your own experiences, Dani, what can we do to ensure that the most vulnerable segments are not forgotten, and how would we go about managing some of that?
Thank you, Ignatius. I think Sunny's brought up some amazing points regarding, again, early notification. We can deal with that a bit more, but in regards to the vulnerable communities and personnel, I think we need to also realize, we often think about vulnerable and sort of have this sort of stereotypical view. It's like single mothers or elderly people. We've also got to appreciate that a lot of vulnerabilities are hidden. So once, be it mental health, or be it illnesses, or be it alcoholism or some kind of addiction. So I think we always need to make sure that when we think about vulnerabilities, we're not thinking about the ones that are obvious and very, very apparent. I know a lot of the work we've been doing in the last year and a half here in Cayman with certain groups. Again, we try and make sure the gender perspective comes into our plans and our outreach, public outreach. We do, going back to those more obvious groups, we do a lot of work with our Older Persons Council, as well as doing specific targeting of messaging and training for individuals. So, for example, we'll go into homes with caretakers, hospice facilities, and make sure that we're actually targeting our planning, preparedness and recovery messaging and specific, I guess, visions to their specific needs, because again, it's not a one catch fits all. It's very much our messaging and our public education has to be quite specific for those individuals. So we try to work with different groups, young kids. We work very much with the schools here that are very much focused on perhaps those with mental disabilities. And so making sure that whatever we're doing in our shelters, for example, let's make sure that we are looking at sensory areas that aren't overwhelming for certain groups of people. So I think, you know, making sure we're very specific in that our messaging and our preparedness goes towards those groups, but also learning from them. I mean, there's one thing of us thinking that this is what they need, but making sure that they actually are very much part of that process, that planning process. Because again, I don't think the top-down approach works when we're thinking about the vulnerable, because we're not necessarily vulnerable ourselves. We may have seen it, we may have been part of it, but that's not the lives that we're living. You know, I think there's been a great meme out last year about, you know, what COVID has hit us all, but we're not actually in the same boat. I mean, perhaps we are in the same boat, but the boats are very different. So I think, you know, maybe someone's in a big sailing boat and someone else is in a very rickety, tiny bit of plywood. It's a very different situation we're coming from. So all planning needs to center around those specific needs and cater towards them. So yeah, having them being part of that process is very, very important. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Now I'd go to Richard and I'll try to get back. Well, we've spoken about the humanitarian components of preparedness and recovery, but about the whole infrastructure and some of what we need to get people back with their regular living, because after most of these events, you would probably very likely have your power systems down, water is out. What is some of what you would have to do in or some of your experiences with putting your teams together, and how do you prepare them for managing such an event?
Well, we definitely have, you know, at CUC, we have a readiness and response plan for each threat. Obviously, the hurricane threat is the most frequent, and we've been impacted by those. So we, you know, we have things such as construction standards. We have to harden the infrastructure. That's the best way of dealing with hurricanes and earthquakes for that matter. So we have very high construction standards, whether it's for the overhead lines. In terms of substations, we've gone with indoor designs so that following a hurricane, we're not, you know, or earthquake, we're not worried about the major components of our systems. We obviously, due to cost, we can't put everything underground, but that's an area that we're moving in as well in collaboration with the regulator to try and get more of our key infrastructure underground. And so that following a major disaster, hurricane or earthquake, we can, you know, quickly restore power, and the repairs will be minimal. I think in terms of people, what I see is that we have to get more individuals and businesses get into the level of preparation and having plans such as, you know, major companies have and the government has, because the more we can have people prepared, the quicker we can get out of the crisis period following a disaster. We have our plans, but sometimes we get diverted because of humanitarian crises. You know, so what we may have as a plan, we may get a call to say, no, don't go in that direction, go in this direction, because we have you know, a critical need for electricity, which we had not anticipated and which really could have been dealt with better planning by the individual or the business. Tropical Storm Grace, in recent memory, things like persons with CPAP machines and so on, with no plans whatsoever to do without electricity for 2 days. I think here in the Caribbean now, we have to be better with the personal planning. And then I would like to mention continuous improvement. I think every disaster or close call is a learning opportunity. They're tough. You know, we lose lives. We lose a lot of valuable equipment, etc. It's a high cost to the economy, and the only benefit we get out of it is, and hopefully we take the opportunity to learn, prepare better for the next event, and because we don't have a lot of major events, I think we need to learn from others in the region. So through CAWASA, which is a regional association of electricity providers, we do provide relief to other areas that are hit by hurricanes. And through that, you know, we were able to see what happens in other events and to learn from that also. Last thing I would touch on is in our area, being remote islands, most of the territory is remote islands. You know, the recovery is a little more difficult than you would see on mainland, for instance. With the recent hurricanes in the Gulf Coast, you would see that days before there will be line crews gathering in a neighboring state. And as soon as the hurricane is passed, they're in and there's immediate response. Here we have to ship people in, fly people in, you know, ship equipment in. So it takes a lot longer. And to the extent that you can establish relationships with key suppliers and relief workers and relief agencies, to be prepared so that you can pull the trigger immediately before or after the event. This will help you on your recovery. So having that plan and those arrangements with overseas suppliers and relief workers, and in our case with Fortis as a major shareholder, we're able to get relief workers in from them as well. So those are a few points with respect to, you know, what we do in response to a major disaster here in Grand Cayman for the electricity provision.
Right, thank you very much for that. Then I will invite Cyprian, if he's there with us, because he too has 25 family islands to attend to on the difficult circumstances, and he has had to deal with us because the situation in one of the islands when we had Hurricane Dorian sitting over there for more than 24 hours, and the challenges of moving people across and getting supplies. During that period, Cyprian, you do get as many people in the international community want to come to offer assistance. How have you been able to manage this and some of the challenges you face when you are overwhelmed with outside assistance? How do you manage this sort of situation?
One thing that we have learned is that the coordination of the international agencies, it's something that has to be developed such that everybody is talking with the same language and using the same protocols. What we have learned coming out of that is that training in incident command and international protocols, because each and every country, and in my case, each and every island has its own little mini protocol, local government, and at the end of the day, when there is an emergency or a disaster, most importantly is for everybody to speak the same language and to be thinking about the same thing. And sometimes that's the most hardest thing, especially when you have to have a mix of local cultures and international agencies with other sets of protocol. And of course, your bureaucracy of the day has been challenged. The type of command system that governments normally make has been challenged. And so the key to that has been to learn from the experience and do advanced training. We've been doing a lot more on incident command training with the assistance of Operators with Borders in conjunction with WASH-LAC. And that is something that has helped us to develop. We also was good to learn from our colleagues from the Caribbean who all reached out to us, and we once again appreciated that, because even though they may not have been able to come right away, knowing that you have that back-end support and the network of Caribbean countries to pull from, especially to assist you with resource mobilization, was an excellent experience. And I take the point, we have islands off of islands off of islands, so the logistical components is key. And that's where also coordination with other agencies like the US Coast Guard and multilateral agencies like UNICEF, and even the NGOs like Water Missions and Israel Aid, they came in, and eventually we all learned how to work together to make things happen.
Right, thank you, Cyprian. The clock is going quickly, but in the midst of all that we are doing, we could not forget that we are managing within and learning to live within the COVID-19 pandemic. Do you think that there's anything that we can do to ensure business and service continuity should we have such a major event taking place during this critical period that we face, and what suggestions you would have for us to continue? I think that one is a little loaded, but you need to have water, you need to have power. And at the same time, I think SUNY would be well placed, because we had that sort of situation in St. Vincent after the volcanic eruption, where you lost water supply and temporarily the power supply, and you had to contend with housing people in shelters during a pandemic. SUNY, any views?
Yeah, I can share. Yeah, so I think one key point around that we deal with now is multiple disasters, right? We're not dealing only, with COVID and earthquake or volcanic eruption and COVID, but sometimes we might even have a hurricane coming when there is COVID and an earthquake happening. And so having the tools and the sector set up for those risks, I think is key. In the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I think one key point to the response was to integrate COVID in the messages, in the supplies delivered. We often deliver soap and basic items for dignity and hygiene and health needs, but we had to integrate COVID as well as messaging. I mean, as part of the response, looking beyond the infrastructure and engineering side, we do need to look at the public health side, the practices, the behavior that can lead to public health outbreaks or to increasing disease and vulnerability. So integrating COVID messages around hand washing, around masks, etc., and working with the health sector, discussing with the health sector on what's being done it's really, I think, important. Beyond the Caribbean, but as part of our work at regional level, we have also developed last year a national WASH sector COVID response plan, which 13 countries adopted, including some in the Caribbean, and is a really good basis to make sure that utilities, for example, have a business continuity plan in place, that services like water is expanded to areas where they weren't serving, perhaps, to make sure that people have access to a key resource during COVID, making sure that services are not cut during a time when water is key for hygiene and COVID prevention. And Yeah, I think another work we did last year, just briefly on COVID, is mapping of the public policies in response to COVID, including in the Caribbean. It covered 26 countries in LAC, and there we were able to map at different levels, and on the financial level, on the supply level, on the service level, what different governments in the region were doing in response to COVID. And with that, sharing and facilitating a dialogue across countries to make sure that you get good examples from one country and you implement in yours. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you. And just maybe ask Dani to make an input on elaborating on some of the points you made.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that sharing of best practice is absolutely critical. I mean, obviously, and the overseas territories, Cayman is one of them, but we also work very closely with others such as Bermuda, TCI, Anguilla, BVI, and so forth. Sharing those kind of practices. So for example, last year, we were working very closely with Bermuda to help them with their quarantine facilities and sort of setting up of mental health hotlines, as well as, exercise situations, so people who are in those kind of quarantine facilities can get some exercise with the appropriate PPE and social distancing. In return, of course, they've been helping us with our supply chain issues that we've had and ideas about what that looks like, as well as other things. So that kind of sharing of best practices and learning from each other is absolutely critical, and I think we really try our best to do that. Cayman has just become a member of the SEDEMA, so of course we're doing a lot of that sharing now in that platform, but sharing of best practice is absolutely critical. Working together, I know Sunny mentioned the whole thing about the networking in and outside of disasters. It's much easier to deal with those very long hours if you are, friendly face that and you've been working with in the past, or you've had some kind of connection with, whether it's online or whether it's in person, those kind of relationship building. And it's not just relationship building at conferences that often happens. It's the sort of having the coffee on the side and having a really good, more personal chat about how you guys do things in different countries. So that kind of sharing of best practices, creating those relationships is absolutely critical to any response. But I think one of my biggest things, again, I think, in the utility sector, as well as the National Emergency Operations Center, obviously, we tend to work around the clock. I think you mentioned, Ignatius, that Sunny was making you work 24/7, and that's what we do as disaster responders. I think it's trying to integrate rotations into that somehow, and also getting the rest we need, so that when we do get back to our regular lives, it's not a massive shock. Obviously, I'm sure last year, my own experience in Thailand, coming back from there in 2005, I found it very difficult to integrate back into the community because my perspective had shifted. So I think, bearing in mind, getting the rest and relaxation when we can, albeit very limited in a disaster zone. But for utility sector, you work around the clock, but you also need to somehow find ways to get that rest and get that recharging the batteries if you are deployed for a significant period of time. Thanks.
Thank you. And of course, I have to try to be a very good moderator. We have 5 minutes left. So I'm going to ask Richard to just chip in his closing bits, and maybe can just squeeze in what he normally gets doing, because he mentioned the work with CAWASA and how it can help to bring relief to other utilities in the region and with his own utility.
Yeah, we've been an active member. Well, we were one of the founding members of CAWASA. I don't recall how many years ago now, but we have participated in many relief initiatives where we've gone to Bahamas, Bermuda, I would say Anguilla, Belize, quite a few countries, and that has been reciprocated. So Hurricane Ivan, we had crews from Barbados, from Bermuda, from Turks and Caicos Islands, and the recovering as quickly as you can so that you can get your economy going again. People can resume some sort of normalcy. It may not be the same as before. They'll have repairs to do, whatever, but if you can get your economy going again, that's key. So the electric utility has to be prepared, as I said, hardening the infrastructure, having arrangements with restoration crews coming in as quickly as possible if it's a major disaster. I think I would point out the TCI Turks and Caicos experience when they had the 2 Cat 5 hurricanes that went through a few years ago, that the Turks and Caicos Islands did not suffer, even though they had 2 major hurricanes. Their economy grew in that year, primarily because they're tourism-based mainly, and the electricity was back up in short order, and the hotels could reopen. So the infrastructure is built to withstand the hurricanes, infrastructure in terms of the condominiums and hotels, and the electricity supply as well. So they fared fairly well. And it's the economic hardship following these disasters that really take a toll on our residents as well.
Thank you so much, Richard. I must be wrapping up now. I have to, before I do that, I must say to you of the work that has been done between the Operators Without Borders and CAWASA in promoting incident command system in the Caribbean. It's an internationally recognized process for disaster management and recovery. And we have had over 200 water managers and operators have gone through level one, the ICS 100, of course, and that has been offered to CARILEC in training utilities so that they can better manage post-disasters and to better prepare for disasters. So I just thought I should manage this. I think we have been all, of course, when we're discussing that sort of topic, it doesn't give us all the time in the world to go through it, but I think we have mentioned some of the critical areas that to do with how to manage the humanitarian situation, and particularly to remember that some of the vulnerable people that we typically think about are not always the ones we should only think of. They are those who may be vulnerable with mental illnesses and special circumstances, such as people who are probably alcoholics and other people who are addicted and who may be homeless, and how do we find them and help in the preparedness process. Of course, building resilient infrastructure, as Mr. Richard, you indicated, can help you to bounce back quickly following an event. And I think it was Suni who mentioned the situation with having our WASH sector preparedness, and that people continue to work closely with each other even before an event. So that I think also Dani mentioned that what is critically important for us to have coffees and so on, and the sort of socializing to bring this issue to the fore and to help our teams to be better prepared. And of course, Cyprian gave us the similar preparedness that we need to have, and the whole supply chain issues, not just for the critical materials and equipment, but the manpower resources that we need to have on hand and located in different locations so that we can move expeditiously in restoring power supplies. So I'd like to thank all of you for doing an excellent job within the critical time frame that we have. But as you are all people working in emergency situations, you all understand that we must bring this to an end. So I'd like to thank all the participants and our distinguished panel, and particularly the CWWA for hosting this event, and the local organizing committee of the Water Authority of the Cayman. I thank all the panel and members for your time in this discussion. I hope that the issues we discussed have resonated with our audience. And I know we have a lot coming to us during this conference, but the issue of disaster preparedness and recovery is one that will never go away. And we always have to keep in mind, and we have to keep practicing what we need to do every day. So I'd like to thank all of you, our operators in the water, wastewater, and solid waste sector in the Caribbean, for your participation and your attention this morning. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And well.
Okay, thank you.
Too. Thank you very much.
All right.
Take care. Thanks.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Count on our support. from the WASH-LAC group and from UNICEF.
And see you soon.
All the best.
Another panel. Thank you.
All right.